Welcome to the Diplomat. My name is Stephen Taylor. Thank you very much for taking the time out to join us today. And today, joined by somebody that looks so much younger than me, but is a bit older than me now, just a little bit. Tony Leon, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Stephen.
With that name, just wow, I remember growing up and just following your whole career, watching you in Parliament and watching how your career progressed, and just amazing. And you don't look a day older.
I am. I'm now 63. I'm very many days older. I left Parliament in 2009, so that's already 11 years ago. So, yeah.
So tell us let's go back to the very young Tony Leon, where it all started. You grew up. Where were you born? Where did it all start?
So I grew up in Durban, and I went to school there, and in Natal, as it was called, a boarding school. Then I did my military service, which was obligatory if you were a white male of a certain age.
Yes.
And then I went to Wits University, where I did a BA in LLB. I qualified as an attorney. I was very active in student politics and aspects of the anti-apartheid struggle. And then when I was 29, I became a Johannesburg City Councillor.
Oh, wow.
And at 32, I was a Member of Parliament. And then I was in Parliament for 20 years, 13 leading the opposition party here, which became the Democratic Alliance, which is still the principal opposition party. And then in 2009, I left Parliament and became an ambassador, which is probably the reason I'm here on your show.
Yes. But now, we take us back to, so you became a Member of Parliament in the National Assembly.
Yeah, what was then called, it was the National Assembly in 1989 for the Democratic Party.
Okay.
It was the last phase of what was the White Parliament, and that was when de Klerk became the president. And of course the whole situation changed in 1990 when he unbanned the ANC, released Mandela, and started the constitutional negotiation process, in which I was very involved as the justice spokesman for my party. And in 1994, of course, we then had an election which led to the emancipation of all South Africans, and I was re-elected to Parliament as the leader of what was a very small party, the Democratic Party. And then, of course, we grew that party, and I stayed in Parliament for the first 15 years of our democratic era.
Wow. Okay, so Tony, being in the National Assembly, but in 1994, very different. So Nelson Mandela became the president of the country. A transition from old to kind of new. How was it being one of the opposition leaders then in Parliament?
Well, it was an amazing experience, because here you had this huge diversity of people and some leading personalities. Of course, Mandela being the prime instance of that, and an exemplary leader, as the world knows. But there were some very significant people in Parliament, like Joe Slovo, and I'm just trying to think of some of the other people, Albertina Sisulu.
Oh, was she in Parliament?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it really was an extraordinary moment, and it was a very hopeful time. I think that's the golden age of South African democracy. It's kind of gone down since. But Mandela led from the front. He was, as you know, an extraordinarily inclusive figure. Although I was head of an opposition party which criticized his party and government a lot, he was all in for having personal discussions and private chats, sometimes almost too seductive. I wrote a book called Opposite Mandela.
Yes.
Because it's very easy to talk about Mandela, the world figure and national leader. But, you know, how did he behave towards his opponents? And that was an interesting disposition that he had, and certainly led to a very intense relationship. Largely good, not always good. He wasn't a saint. He was a political leader, apart from his other qualities. And we had some pretty sharp disagreements, but mostly we didn't, because he actually enjoyed having the back and forth of someone who disagreed with him.
Wow.
In fact, the ghostwriter of his biography, Long Walk to Freedom, Richard Stengel, said, the further away you were from Mandela, the closer he wanted to get you. The closer you were to him, sometimes he wasn't so warm.
Yes.
So I had the full Mandela treatment, I used to call it. And from phone calls to visits to discussions.
What, would he
to
just
breakfast.
pick up the phone and phone you?
Absolutely.
Really?
Or ask me to come around. In fact, in one stage in 1997, he asked me to join his government as a minister, but from the opposition side.
Yes.
And I didn't, because we had several discussions. He said, you know, Tony, we must face the world with one face, like, and then he added Mugabe and Nkrumah. And I thought, well, we know what happened in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
So I think not. Anyway, we still continued our discussions and détente, but it didn't inhibit me from being very critical when I thought the government made missteps, because the job of an opposition party, wherever it is in the world, is not to ingratiate itself with the government, but
Yes.
to stand up for its supporters
Yes.
and to advance a different agenda.
So, Mandela, obviously, this now airing in Mandela Month. Obviously, as a person, no person is perfect. We're all human, we make mistakes.
Sure.
But the legacy of Nelson Mandela, what he stood for, his vision, what would you say that you miss about him as being a leader in society in South Africa, but also a figure around the world, having Mandela Day and just that going out and doing something good for somebody else? Do you think that's important in our society?
Oh, I think it's critical, and obviously we're now in the middle of a terrible global pandemic or plague, coronavirus, and you want, I think Albert Camus, the great French writer, said the way to beat the plague is through kindness.
Yes.
And I think kindness is important, and I think Mandela had exemplary qualities of emotional intelligence and empathy. So I think we can learn from that. But I think actually the most important political lesson of Mandela, which is sadly absent in South Africa and much of the world today, was his ability to lead from the front and take decisions that were correct but not necessarily popular. And unfortunately in South Africa and other parts of the world, you have leaders who don't lead. They tend to equivocate and compromise in the middle. And, you know, with the times that we're in this country, but not uniquely in South Africa, with cratered economies, massive unemployment, you've got to do some tough things.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first met Mandela at a dinner at his home in Houghton, Johannesburg, I was the member of parliament for that area. He invited me for dinner. He'd just come back from the World Economic Forum in Davos. And, you know, the ANC had a far left socialist economic policy at that time. Well, they do today again,
Yeah.
but anyway, that's another discussion. And Mandela said, well, you know, I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and all the captains of industry wanted to have their photograph taken with me, but they also hit me over the head and they said, if you don't change your policy on nationalisation and other matters, we're never going to invest in your country.
Sure.
He said, I came back and I said to our economics team, boys, in fact, Tito Mboweni was in that head of that team, boys, we've got to change our policy. And we did. And that's leadership, you know.
Yes.
When the facts
So
change,
listen.
you've got to actually adjust.
Yeah.
Problem in South Africa and other countries is the facts have changed fundamentally, and we haven't adjusted. We just keep doing the same old thing, hoping for a different result, which is Einstein reminded us is the first form of insanity.
But a leader is defined, like as you say. I mean, I'm sure you've had meaningful debates with Mandela, but they were good debates. They were meaningful, and you never went after that and said, "Oh, I don't like this guy," or went to the media and did things like that. You tried to engage and work things out for the better of South Africa.
Yes,
and that's
and
what a good
obviously,
leader does.
you know, he was the president. I
Yes.
was the head of what was then a very small party, which became larger.
Yeah.
That was largely at his initiative. I mean, I didn't phone up the president of South Africa and say, oh, I'd like to have a chat. He always phoned me.
Yes.
Or he asked me round. He did come to my 40th birthday party and a few other occasions. And when I was going out with my then girlfriend, he turned around to us one day and said, when are you going to marry this man? I hadn't even asked her yet. So as Michal, my wife, says, well, we had a very unusual marriage broker. He happened to be Nelson Mandela. So there were many occasions like that.
Yes.
But it's the president or the head of government who sets the tone.
Yeah.
However much the opposition tries to make the political weather, they don't have those powers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So tell me, okay, so moving ahead then, you were leader of one of the opposition parties in Parliament. What happened after then? You left?
Well, in 1999, I became the leader of the official opposition because
yes.
we became the largest party in that election.
And working with Mbeki, yes.
Well, yes, or not working with Thabo Mbeki, who, unlike Mandela, didn't take well to opposition.
Every leader is different, yeah.
Absolutely. Then Mbeki, I left the leadership of my party in 2007, and then 2009 I left Parliament. By then, of course, Mbeki had been ousted by the ANC from his presidency, and Zuma became president. And shortly after that election, he met with me. And he, at that stage, it was long before the Guptas and others arrived in South Africa, or were active in the politics and the economy, he was very much of the mind that South Africa had to be represented by people overseas who weren't just ANC faces. And in that level, he approached me and he offered me to become an ambassador. And I thought that was an interesting role that you could play, even if you were in the opposition, precisely because, you know, you have different views on the politics of the country, but you do support patriotically the stance of your country. And the countries that I was sent to represent South Africa were in the southern cone of South America, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. And
was it 3 countries?
Yeah, but I was based in Buenos Aires, but because our large focus of our work was in Argentina, which is the second biggest economy in South America and the biggest Spanish-speaking economy.
Oh, wow.
That was important to be there, but Paraguay was less significant economically and population-wise, and Uruguay the same. So we ran those operations from Argentina, which were neighboring countries of it. So I was there for nearly 4 years, and it was a very engaging experience, something completely different.
It is different,
But I learned a lot of skills, and I took some of my old skills and applied them in a new domain.
So when you got that call from the then president...
We had a meeting.
Oh, right. So you had a meeting. Were you a bit taken aback that he asked something like that?
Well, he actually wanted me to do some role domestically, and I thought I'm finished with domestic politics.
Yeah.
So in the course of conversation, a colleague of mine had been actually appointed by Mbeki as an ambassador in Thailand, Douglas Gibson, who was the chief whip.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a break quickly and then we want to be more in conversation next. You are watching The Diplomat with Stephen Taylor. We're on conversation with Tony Leon. If you want to interact and engage, at Stephen Taylor SA on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be back next. So welcome back to The Diplomat with Stephen Taylor. We're on conversation with ex-diplomat, ex-member of parliament, I don't know, there's so many X's, but it's amazing. I like that, Tony Leon. Thank you for still being here. You didn't run away during the break. So we were talking about that moment that you had with former President Jacob Zuma where he asked you to become an ambassador. Did you have to go home and think about it, or did you decide straight away?
Well, I had to go home and persuade my wife.
Oh, wow.
She was not that keen.
So up and leave, yeah.
And then we settled on the countries, which was also a bit of a stretch because I'd been to Argentina actually to celebrate my 50th birthday. Now, 4 years later, I was going back as ambassador. So I was rather taken with the place. And when we settled on that, I went, and it was a big adjustment. You know, first of all, Spanish-speaking country, and I didn't speak any Spanish. I was learning. And I never learned it very well. My wife learned much better than I did.
Oh, wow.
But, you know, just a completely new job and an enormous amount of bureaucracy on both the South African side and the Argentinian side. And, you know, I'd been the boss of the DA. And now I was a cog in a huge and often impenetrable wheel of the South African Department of International Relations, which, you know, frankly was almost soul-destroying at times because it just to get things done according to the book, and I was very conscious that I couldn't operate outside the rule book, was a great challenge. But anyway, you know, you learn to adjust. The other big change, which I hadn't thought about, is that Argentina, time-wise, is 5 hours behind South Africa, so the window of communication
is small.
Is very small. And by 12:30 Argentine time, South Africa had closed down, so you couldn't communicate, and a lot of matters did require a response. I presume you could ever get one, even in time, which was also another challenge. But, you know, we had a lot of successes, and I found it very absorbing after an initial very difficult transition of just, you know, new country, new job, new language, new everything.
Yeah. So do you meet the president, or how does it work? Do they...
Well, you've got to meet the president,
in order to get
credentials.
Yes.
And I did. Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, a very controversial person. She's now the vice president of Argentina. And then I had to go to the other two countries to present my credentials to the president of Uruguay and to the president of Paraguay. So that was really a
Did
formality.
they know where South Africa was?
Yeah.
That's a funny question, but you don't know.
Yes, everyone knew Mandela and everyone knew South Africa. Look, I mean, Argentina...
Yeah, he did good for us putting us on the map.
Yeah, but Argentina and South Africa were very close because of rugby and because of the forthcoming Football World Cup.
Oh, yes.
Bear in mind, I was there just as the FIFA Football World Cup in 2010, and all three countries were absolutely football mad.
Were you back in the country for the
2010? No, I was there promoting South Africa over there and making sure we got enough tourists, and we had a huge splurge of tourists. We also were hugely assisted in our work because there were at that stage 2 direct air links to Argentina from South Africa, South African Airways. Well, that ended after I left happily, and Malaysian Airways used to fly from Kuala Lumpur, Cape Town, Buenos Aires, which was massively helpful, both in terms of tourism, trade, exposure, and so we used those links very effectively to promote the country.
So what would you say were some of the successes? The relationship between South Africa and Argentina good?
It was very good. Look, the big successes we had were on the tourism front, the trade front. The trade went up enormously while I was there, not just because I was there. And that had a lot to do with their agricultural industry, because we provided a lot of the chemicals that they needed, the fertilizer, phosphates and so on. And Argentinian agriculture is arguably the best in the world. It's got 20 feet of topsoil, and they've got no-till cultivation methods. Amazing.
Sure.
And then we also managed to help Argentinian agri-producers come to South Africa and to invest here. It was very easy investment climate then, much more difficult now.
What is the climate like there? Is it hot, cold?
Well, it's like Cape Town, actually.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's in direct line with Cape Town, same degrees of latitude.
Okay.
And it's pretty similar, of course, in reverse, because it's the same.
Yeah.
We're in the southern hemisphere. So yeah, it's
and
pretty
the currency
similar.
is
the peso, which was massively inflated while I was there. So there were a lot of Argentina's an economically very troubled country. You know, at the time of the Second World War, it was the 7th richest country in the world.
Wow.
Today its economy is smaller than South Africa's, even post-COVID or during COVID. So it's declined. And you know, there's a lesson in that, because they're great people. I mean, there's an Argentinian Pope in the world, Pope Francis.
Yes.
There's an Argentinian Queen of the Netherlands.
Yes.
There's Lionel Messi. These are great Argentines.
Yeah, they've got a good football team. Yeah.
They've got good people, good football team, good rugby team, as you know.
Yes.
But they have very bad governance. They have bad politics and often toxic governments who are populist and economically irresponsible. So they've had 9 sovereign credit defaults.
Wow.
And that means that internally the economy is very unstable.
Yeah.
And of course, at the time, South Africa, was regarded as a very economically stable and well-governed country. But, you know, since then we've lapsed. We then had, very little debt. We had good property protection in this country. We had investment protection agreements with countries like Argentina. All those have either lessened or been removed. And I think South Africa has suffered. So you don't get the levels of investor interest from big spenders, who you do find as individuals in Argentina, because we're not an attractive economic destination. At my time...
Well, that was pre-COVID, but now...
but at my time we were, because, you know, this country was more economically sustainable than it is at the moment. Yeah.
But I think the one good thing about, I wouldn't call it good, for lack of a better word, is that the virus has basically brought all countries, I wouldn't say equal, but it gives an opportunity for countries like South Africa, Argentina, and others to kind of start again and to build from...
Well, if you learn the right lessons, you know, you can start again on very shaky foundations. I mean, the Minister of Finance in South Africa this Wednesday, with his supplementary emergency budget, said we've got to build on a foundation of rock. And one of the critics of this government's approach said, yes, but the problem is the government's built its foundations on quicksand. So, yes, you do have a new reset, but it depends what you choose as your founding basis.
Yes. No, we'll get there. I think in anything in life, we just have to remain optimistic and have hope.
And be resilient.
Yes. That's right.
Yeah.
As South Africans, we've got a good sense of humor, I must say. Okay, so now you're not a diplomat anymore. You spend your time writing books or reading books.
Well, I write. I'm about to write my.
Yes.
I'm busy writing my 5th book, which is about what's going on here
Yes.
in the world and why it's happened, and some of the personalities, for good or for ill, who've made things happen or not happen. I'm the chairman of a communications company called Resolve, which does a lot of work with private sector clients, both in terms of their messaging and their strategic communications and advocacy work. So that keeps me
Young.
busy commercially and puts food on the table at home. And I do quite a lot of speaking and engagements. Well, I did. Of course, COVID stopped that. And I do a few webinars, as we now have to communicate via Zoom. Yes, well, it's interesting.
Technology, yeah.
But I think you've got to keep curious. You've got to keep engaged, and you've got to be thinking about the future.
Yes. And if they ever asked you to go back to be a diplomat, would you?
Well, I would take it under advisement. I don't think my wife would agree. It's very hard, to be in 3 different places.
Yeah.
We were in Argentina. Our home was here. The children were all over the place. So that was quite hard. But, never say never.
But I agree with you what you say. You have to stick to the book. Like I know that one of the people that I know is the ambassador in Washington, the USA for South Africa. And she said that she wanted to go and get involved with the Black Lives Matter. She couldn't, because you are not allowed to be seen as taking a side to certain things. Is that true?
Absolutely. But what you do need, though, what we did in my embassy in Argentina, we certainly didn't get publicly involved.
Yes.
But we maintained very good links with the government, obviously, the foreign minister and the foreign ministry, but also with all the opposition leadership.
Yes.
And that was useful, so that, for example, the mayor of Buenos Aires, when I was there, Mauricio Macri, who was the head of an opposition party, we had very good links with. And I thought that was very important. In fact, that I had been the leader of the opposition in South Africa did endear me to opposition leaders there.
Yes.
And then, of course, after I left, Macri became the president of Argentina. So my successor then at least had an entry point, which might not have been the case if I'd only concentrated on the government. And the job of an ambassador, apart from being a salesman, because you're selling your country, you must have a network. And a friend of mine in Cape Town, Philip Krawitz, is a big business guy here. He said to me, before I left, he said, your net worth is your network, and your network is your net worth.
That's true.
And that's true.
That is true.
So I built up a contact list, I visited people, I made myself known. So, it was very useful.
So tell us, so people can get your books online?
And I think they're online, they're on Amazon. Yeah, absolutely.
And the new one is going to be called?
Well, it hasn't got a name yet, but it's Reflections on My Troubled Land is the subtitle. We've got various titles, but it's going to be a look at deep dive.
This year or next year?
This year, I think towards the end of the year.
Okay.
I've still got to finish it. I've got to rush to the studio to carry on writing.
We're keeping you away from writing your book. So what advice would you give to somebody wanting to possibly... Is that how it works in South Africa, that you get asked by the president to join the diplomatic corps? Is there different other ways?
Look, I was what you might call a lateral entrant.
Okay.
So I wasn't a career diplomat. There are 2 types of diplomats here, and I guess they're career diplomats who work their way up through the department, and you join young and you go through various things.
Other motions.
Eventually you will, if you're any good, will become an ambassador. And then there are people who brought in, which caused a lot of controversy because they're so-called political appointees. Of course, the professional diplomats sometimes look down on them, or they don't approve of them. But, you can have too many of the one and not enough of the other. So I think you need a balance. But, if you want a career in diplomacy, you should study, get involved, and don't be defeated by the system.
Yes.
I mean, the real negative is the slowness of it, the bureaucracy, and especially here where we have a very cumbersome bureaucratic system. And but you've got to just be at it. But without promoting my books, I did write a book called The Accidental Ambassador, which describes the experience. So
I'm going to go read that.
I think your viewers need to look at that.
No, thank you, Tony. And I know that you are very active on Twitter. People can go and follow you there. What is your Twitter handle? At Tony Leon
SA.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, I like that because mine is at Stephen Taylor SS. So
Well, I had to put, there was another Tony Leon. So
oh,
I had to
really?
put, yeah, it was already before.
There's a lot of Stephen Taylors as well, I know. So, yeah.
Tony Leon's a very popular name.
But there's
in
only
Latin
one
America.
young Tony Leon, man. Come on. Huh? Get it right, people. No, Tony, thank you so much for your time.
you,
I
Stephen.
appreciate it. And you're welcome anytime.
Great success.
We'll definitely get you back. Thank you very much. Another episode of The Diplomat in Conversation with Tony Leon. Thank you. Interact with the show at Stephen Taylor SA on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you to Akona. Thank you to Papi and the rest of the crew. Take care.